Samantha. I'm back. Okay, we've got a phenomenal panel, and we really want to talk about this this overlap between online child sexual exploitation and abuse and non-sexually motivated crimes. We already heard quite a bit about it earlier today, but we know that effective response requires collaboration, and that's why we're here to learn from one another. And our panelists are going to take us through a bunch of information. I'm going to ask them some questions, and then we're going to have time for you to ask them questions as well. So with that, I'm going to start by getting some context, okay? Again, we're talking about leveraging AI and other technologies to detect offenders and criminal networks. So in terms of context, June, if I can start with you, what behavioral patterns or network structures do CSAM operations share with other types of online criminal networks?
Yeah, and excuse me, my conversation is going to be more of a kind of summarizing what previous the panels spoke about. Usually, when I go somewhere and then start talking about online abuse, there I talk about the three cycles: is frictions, evolution, sophistication. So when there's a abuse happen, whether it's a law enforcement platform or we try to introduce frictions to stop it, and becomes there's an evolution to bypass it, which means it becomes sophisticated. And we try to stop the sophistications by introducing the friction, and it goes cycles and cycles and cycle. And notably, those sophistication is more of customizing, targeted to the user who are vulnerable. How do we kind of compare as a kind of scam? If you remember, like a couple of years ago or 10 years ago, if you think about the scam calls you get, is automated messaging that you have your due IRS tax, you have to pay for it. And we're like, okay, whatever. Now this is much more sophisticated. What they do is if you're living in the US, they will use the same area code that you're in, so that they're making sounds like it's coming from your local phone number. Or a case that is kind of surfacing right now is, for example, those are like me, Korean Americans living in the US, or Japanese American living in here. What they do is, hey, I'm from Consulate of Korea. And what they do is they speak your language. And think about it, like you're living in the US. How often do you get a call from third party that speaks your language, right? And they say you're involved with the criminals XYZ, and further, like it goes on. When I first kind of came into the industry, when I was first trained on the CSAM, it was more conversation was about the person to person. It was an individual trying to roll in the minors to get those information. And what we see now is more of an enterprise and an industry. The biggest example, and I will highly encourage everybody to look at it, is if you look at the Nth Room scandal that happened in Korea, you see the actual enterprise of the criminals network happening. So how they did it, TLDR, is they had 4 different groups working. One, sourcing team. Second is acting team. Third is distributors, and fourth is money mans. Right. What the sourcing team is, they will look for those vulnerables and they start penetrating. And how that behavior of the industry evolved was, if you watch the movie, for example, a cops or somebody try to find a drug man and go to all the way up. They ask for the name and they say, I don't know about the guy, right? All I know is I'm waiting for the call, and if they give me a call, I'll respond. So they'll try to limit the information shared between the groups to make sure that the penetration is lessened, and then the information shared less. Um, those are some of the behaviors that we see, is that they will make a sophisticated organization and they will divide up the organization, making sure that there's limited information, but also they become much more impactful. In the normal organization, we call the roles and responsibility, right? They make sure the roles and responsibility grows with the evolution and sophistication of the abuse that happen. Later on the line, I'm going to share 2 examples that I came across and I share. And just to summarize this note, I had a fantastic conversation with the law enforcement, and basically this is the keyword that law enforcement told me. The law enforcement was talking to one of those network, caught the criminals and having a conversation and asking about it. And then the keywords they use is, we're trying to localize. So we're trying to localize a vulnerability, so making sure that we are much more impactful. If we think about before, it's more of a big net that we're trying to throw and then see if we can catch one or two. Now just like the examples that I gave, the way it becomes sophisticated is they try to localize to making sure they have a high success rate, and that is some of the emerging trend that we've been seeing as a network.
Right. Thanks, June. Brian, do you want to discuss a little bit about what you're seeing?
Sure.
Modification of CSAM.
Sure. Thank you for having us here. Good to be here in DC, to the folks online as well. I think that if you had said to me, I spent probably the last decade of my time in law enforcement before I retired in 2022, working primarily violent crimes against children. And I think if you had told me then that the problem would have gotten tremendously worse post-COVID, I wouldn't have been surprised. But when I came back and started working with Thorn approximately a year ago, and we started seeing a lot of the research that we've been releasing at Thorn that talks about the commodification of this crime violation, in that approximately 1/3 of the young people that we're talking to are being solicited online within 20 interactions in order to get them to potentially self-produce content, is not surprising. But I think what is really scary is the fact that I spent a large part of my career chasing cyber criminals who were motivated by financial means. And I think the challenge that we have right now is that no longer, and I think the panel earlier with Stacia and Steve and Elliot did a great job setting the table for talking about how the problem has gotten so much worse because, again, it is not just the pedophile with a mental illness who is looking to gain access to children, but this content is truly a currency. And the fact that we have, I think Elliot mentioned and did a great job of identifying artificial intelligence now, is that currency creator. We used to chase counterfeiters who had printing presses, printing currency, running all night long, $20 bills coming off the printing press. AI is doing the same thing because that content is currency. It has the ability to produce not just tens of thousands. You know, Steve used the example of hard drive full of content that's coming off. And so very much we are facing a tidal wave of content that's coming out there, whether it is US law enforcement, foreign law enforcement doing victim identification work. Their job is being made so much more difficult because the investment of resources that law enforcement is putting into identifying a child who in the end may not be a real child. And that waste of resources is only making it more difficult for them to raise those cases up, to work those cases where real children are being victimized.
Thank you. Juliet, you want to add something?
Yeah. Thank you to the other panelists and to Nuria in the first panel to really, they've done a great job speaking about kind of the scale of harm that's really exacerbated, especially in this current age with AI. I think it's important to remember that AI is a tool like any other tool. Right now, we've talked a lot about how AI is being used as a tool by bad actors in a lot of ways. The way that we think about it at Roost, we're a nonprofit building open source software for online safety, is there's the Internet 1.0 harms. These are things pre-generative AI, before the really big boom and the scale really hit us. Those harms didn't go away. Spamming, scamming, sextortion, grooming, other types of solicitation and abuse. But with AI, we not only see that accelerated, amplified, but we also see new 2.0 harms. I think as AI develops, we will see agentic harms come into place. More sophisticated video generation. So previously, maybe like a child would video call with someone and say, oh, this person is real because I video call with them. They're responding to me live. AI provides a new tool now that makes it so that kind of technology is really deceptive as well. So it's a form of kind of, increase the need for increased digital literacy. And I think when we go back to your original question of the patterns that share with other types of harms, if you're a more mature technology platform, you have developed ML or AI models that are designed to detect the behavior of certain types of harms. There might be opportunities here to look at things that, like spam models or scammer models that maybe have similar behavior traits as the new kind of commercial CSAM and solicitation bad actors, and then combine that with other signals, like on the actor side or on the content side, to create new models that kind of pull from what we've all learned from addressing some of those Internet 1.0 harms to tackle this new wave that started in like 2018, 2019, and has only grown since.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Juliet. Okay, so I want to kind of pivot to balancing speed and accuracy. So, uh, how can companies and platforms balance the speed of detection with accuracy when investigating potential criminal activity? And how should we think about threat prioritization? Tyler, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. I'll start. And I just want to build on what Juliet was saying, that like the models and the way you build typologies to detect activity, that's not a new thing. And sextortion, like all of these different typologies that we're talking about, are different in many different ways. Like CSAM, if you're seeing sort of overseas activity versus something in the neighborhood that might be human trafficking, versus sextortion, which is really a type of scam. We're not starting from scratch in terms of how we build all of that. I think just in terms of how we can balance speed. One is technology just has to be part of the solution. So what's changed, I think, over the last few years is the immediacy and the speed of these digital tools. That's what people like about them. That's what my 13 and 15-year-old love, is sort of technology. They're technology natives. It's also, though, obviously introduced a tremendous amount of complexity and risk into the environment. For us, one of the things we have to do is we measure constantly. So we are every single day looking at the data, understanding how are the models operating, how are the different systems working, what's the precision level, what's the recall level, what should we be doing in real time versus back end for investigation. So I think technology and constant measurement is absolutely critical. I think we also kind of need to sort of understand what makes this environment difficult is also present some opportunities. We have hundreds of different signals associated with digital transactions that we can use. So we're looking at geolocation, device ID, contact book data. All of that is tremendously robust and really effective if you're using it in the right combinations to sort of understand and toggle your different rules. So I think understanding how to use technology, measuring it constantly to watch for how things change. And I think the last sort of point I would make, in terms of how we think about things and sort of balancing all of that, is it's not just about detection all the time. Sometimes we look at a scenario or a typology and we say, this is really a KYC issue. This is something upfront at the product end that we need to solve there. So if we can keep it off the platform to begin with, I think we need, to sort of start at that point. So it's complicated. I think it's evolving really rapidly. I do want to applaud, and I know we'll get to it in a later question, the work that the Tech Coalition has done with Project Lantern. Both my former employer, my current one, are a big part of that. I think understanding how to use those signals from off our platform is absolutely critical as well.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. And I agree. The prevention, better to prevent it, and to design so that they can't even gain access or do the thing. Okay, so Fran, over to you. How can you describe a little bit about how Resolver uses open source intelligence and machine learning?
Yeah, certainly. And just pick up on the speed of action. I think like strong signals where you have them, like, you get the content down like either before it happens or within seconds. And that's like a really powerful way just to stop that ripple effect of it spreading, because, you get the honey trap effect and you start to bring the bad actors in. So I think that's a really powerful way. So we provide trust and safety intelligence to platforms. So we are a separate organization, but we work with platforms to see where bad actors are evading detections that are already in place to help platforms strengthen their capabilities. But we're also looking, because we're looking across multiple platforms, we do a lot of off-platform intelligence. So the way we start to unpick that is we're looking at the broader picture of risk and trying to model the individual actors and people involved in the different crimes that are happening. So if you look at CSAM as an example, there are a lot of signals around CSAM. That can look quite noisy until you start to say, well, in this case, we're looking at extortion. In this case, these actors and these signals are related to trafficking. In these cases, there's actually vulnerable user groups going on. Maybe there's some self-generation of CSAM. Maybe people are being coerced, or maybe there's just a poor platform feature, which is leading to, inadvertent sharing and then escalation of harm. So we start to understand what's going on, and then you can take the appropriate action in terms of how we prioritize that. That's looking for how you can get the greatest impact. There's a lot of threat out there. You will never get rid of all of it, but you have to pick where you can make the most effect. So that would be looking at the people who are having, have the most connections, who are reaching out to the most children, who are, are most present on platforms, who have the greatest number of followers, etc. So we really target those individuals in terms of working with platforms. So this is where you should enforce. When you've identified that there's it's a self-generation situation, or it's children who aren't educated around the harm that they're, exposing themselves to, that's when we'll start to lean in to talk to platforms around their policy. What can they do to improve their platform features? There's a really great opportunity with regulation now to lean on the age assurance to say, well, now we know like where the children are. It's okay to be a little bit more forward leaning with your protective measures in a way that you wouldn't do with adults, because you don't want to stray into that censorship environment. But where you have children, you can prompt, you can say, do you want to share this? You can lock down the features a lot more legitimately so, which is an acceptable way to behave once you're dealing with children. So we start to talk about those safety by design measures to protect people, and that's how we really sort of prioritize our actions and how we try and get the best impact.
Yeah, absolutely. We are increasingly seeing those proactive prompts from the platform to the minor user. Are you sure you want to do this, etc. Yeah. Fran, I'm going to come right back to you. We're going to talk about bottlenecks. So from your perspective, what's the biggest bottleneck in moving from identifying the suspicious activity and mapping criminal networks to actually executing a coordinated response?
So, Abby, you were talking about the language of risk. I think that's a fundamental difficulty that we all have. We all talk about risk in a different way, and sometimes that's subtle and they're minor differences, but sometimes they're bigger differences. But if we can't talk about a harm and translate between multiple platforms and have a conversation in these forums, as an industry about what harm looks like and what it means, then it's very difficult to take meaningful action and things slip between the cracks. So you talked about the 764 comm networks earlier, that many platforms will see that and categorize it as abuse or harassment or nihilistic behavior and sadism. There's always the CSAM risk within there. There's multiple other risks. So if we're not labeling our data and talking about it in the right way, we're not going to spot those patterns that are present, and often they're easier and more robust in terms of detection, because whilst language will change and people will try and evade detection, and we know especially in organized crime people are clever and they move, you need to make it an operationally difficult environment for them. So behaviors are a good way to detect bad actors, but if you're not talking about it in the right way, what chance do we stand as a community of detecting it like consistently going forward? So I think the language and the categorization work that's going on will help us. I think it'll give us like just a more consistent scaffolding to act. I think we're seeing the move as well away from the balance of risk being on breach of data protection. I think that's been a big bottleneck for us. You don't want to breach people's personal privacy. It's a problem with Lantern. But we do need to share intelligence. And I think the operational effect of the regulations will help make it more risky not to remove harmful actors from your platform than potentially the financial penalties that you get for data protection regulations. There's a tightrope to walk there, isn't there? But if we can start to really join that up, allow people to act, allow people to share information, then we'll start to remove the bottlenecks a little bit more. And I think finally the point is like leaning away from the tendency to over-report. So again, in terms of coordinated action, if you are flooding law enforcement desks or NGO desks with potential CSAM, I think NetMec recently reported only 50% of the reports were actionable. So there's a lot of data there. Now, maybe some of that is victim identification data. Maybe some of it is just complete noise. We need to get better and be able to say, well, this is CSAM. Here's a category and the severity of the abuse. Here is AI Gen. Here is clear anime. And it's still interesting information. There's still action to perform, but in some cases there's no victim to deal with, and you're looking at the offender exclusively, and sometimes there's a victim there. So I think, again, we need to be better at categorizing our data and raising the threshold of, knowing where the harm is occurring.
That's great. Thank you, Fran. Ryan, do you want to talk a little bit about the challenge of silos?
Yeah, I think there are significant silos that exist. I applaud the work that industry has done to bridge some of those gaps, a la things like Lantern, where industry groups are sharing information. Having worked within law enforcement, that I see all too often, though, the silos that exist amongst law enforcement. that aren't able to communicate with each other, aren't able to share information readily, and whether that's governed by laws, whether it's governed by privacy regulations. But more and more so, I've seen law enforcement that had keys and key pieces of information that they either couldn't share with other agencies, or the other agency just wasn't aware of that information. I think we're seeing that more and more as a deconfliction issue, especially as we talk about these NVE, these COM 764 groups in particular, because those groups in particular can have multiple subjects, multiple victims. We're also starting to see where victims in those cases are becoming subjects. And so you have multiple agencies, whether it's a local ICAC here in the United States, a federal agency, a global agency, that may have information about a victim that has become a subject because, again, that content is being used to lure that victim in order to become an offender, either against a sibling or another minor. And so you have this very nebulous cases where are they a victim, are they a subject, but that information isn't being shared and it's being siloed. And so I think as a community, we need to do a better job in order to ensure that intelligence is getting from agency to agency, to ensure that all the resources of global law enforcement can work together to ensure that those cases are being brought forward quickly, identifying those victims quickly. But I think a good lesson can be taken from industry in how to do that.
Juliet, I'm going to move on to signal sharing. How do you think cross-industry signal sharing can help reduce those response bottlenecks, and what's needed to strengthen it and scale it?
Thanks, Sean. And with my answer, I hope to answer both this question and the one prior to and tie it together. I think as Tyler said earlier, technology has to be part of the solution. When you have great signal sharing programs like Lantern, I think especially if you're a small tech company, you might get that signal. It's like, okay, what do I do with this now? You might not have the infrastructure, the systems internally to conduct an independent investigation, to do that scaled review and apply the correct labels, that maybe it's using the universal classification schema, maybe it's using a different type of data standardization to make sure that that report is highly actionable, like Fran was saying, so that by the time it reaches hotlines and by the time it's relayed to law enforcement, there's enough information and there's enough context for that kind of work to actually be properly investigated and enforced on. So I do think lack of access to technology is both a large kind of bottleneck, but it also is the solution for kind of how do we actually make signal sharing really deployable at scale. And I think the Pathways program is a great way to kind of provide guidance to small tech, to organizations who are looking to kind of do the right thing and get their child safety programs up and running. We're hopeful that with Roost, with our open source tools, we provide a free and open source option so people to build their in-house solutions and kind of just get that 80% there and then customize to figure out what works best for their platform.
So in case anybody here doesn't know, just explain Roost and what you're doing.
Really quickly, Roost stands for Robust Open Online Safety Tools. We're a US-based 501c3 nonprofit. We launched in February. Our purpose, a bunch of us left the private sector. I've been in, child safety efforts for about 10 years. And we're building these trust and safety tools and systems, open source. We're building in the open. It's scaffolding and neutral infrastructure. So things like the hashes, they stay private. They're governed by the right bodies. Things like signals stay private. They're governed by the right bodies. But the actual mechanisms to actually investigate them and pursue them, we're hoping to deliver with Roost.
Yeah.
And, I also want to give a shout out to the Tech Coalition for provisioning photo DNA licenses, because that is a huge thing that we hear a lot. And then to Kindred Tech, who I think is virtually providing photo DNA licenses to law enforcement agencies.
Fantastic. Yeah. So what Juliet's explaining is open source technology that will save companies time, money, energy, and get them up and going much more quickly. And previously they would have had to develop on their own or pay for. So it's it's free and it's available, and you can talk to Juliet about it. It's pretty incredible. Okay, I've just lost my place, but I'm coming back to it. Tyler, in terms of cross-industry signal sharing, how can financial institutions share use threat signals, and what do you need?
Yeah, this is a question for you almost, but it's big. This is a really big issue, the ability to share signals across the industry. And I think, we heard both Fran and Brian talk about the silos as well. I mean, we've seen this before, right? Going even back to sort of terrorist financing and some of the lessons we learned about when you're not sharing information, you are not seeing the whole puzzle. And I think that that's really critical. There are obviously privacy and security issues, and I think those are really important. But I do think this is a solvable problem for us. I think it helps one both with detection. So there's certain pieces of data that if we triangulate it, like where neither party would have the full picture, it could be IP signal data that a digital company has. When we triangulate it with our KYC data, we actually know who a perpetrator might be. So detection gets so much stronger. I think to Fran's point earlier too, though, like our reporting will be much better too. We will actually understand what it is that we're reporting. So I just want to emphasize the importance of sharing in terms of how to do it. I mean, I really do, sort of applaud the effort of the Tech Coalition with Project Lantern. I think those types of sort of industry-led forums are going to be really critical. I think we're moving into an era where I think self-regulation really is, going to be a really important part of the solution. I also would just sort of encourage folks in the private sector. I mean, privacy is very important, and the trust of our customers is critical. But there are areas where I think it's fair to lean in a little bit and say, hey, we're willing to sort of, particularly for vulnerable consumers, for children, to do sharing that you might not do sort of in another context. So I think that's important. We've talked about, I think probably everybody has talked about sort of whether there should be a 314B, framework for this type of information sharing. I think that's effective, and in some ways allows people to be pretty targeted about what they share. So you're really about looking for information that's actionable when it's triangulated with other signals. So I do think that there's probably some policy iteration that needs to happen here. Perhaps legislation, certainly regulators coming out with good guidance that I think is helpful. But in the meantime, I think frameworks like Lantern are a really good start. And I think we ought to be looking and judging both the successes that we have, but areas where we say, hey, that didn't, we didn't get the right signals, we didn't get them quickly enough, it wasn't actionable enough, and take that back and see how we can evolve.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. Okay, June, I'll come back to you. So we've talked a lot about technology in terms of detection, but as AI is increasingly deployed, machine learning, criminal networks then become more sophisticated in their evasion techniques. How are you seeing these networks adapt?
Yeah. So I will share two examples. So one of the examples that we saw was basically there's a lot of platform that kind of allows you to share some explicit sexual content and also implicit sexual content. And we talk about the scam, and the behavior that we saw was what the scammers, what the network penetrators, that they will identify those user self-serve, they post their own pictures, and also they will find those network who will react to those, whether it's a hashtag or the video or something, they'll react to it. And basically they created this interest group that becomes a core point there. All right, they are reacting to this, so if we approach them, they're gonna react to what we do, and they will do typical scamming behavior. Hey, your content has been leaked, we need to do something, contact us, give me your information, and then kind of goes on, which was kind of clear case for the Anthem that happened in the Korea. It was one of the things. So what they're utilizing is that before it was more of a one-on-one. Now they're able to create a cluster of people who are interested, and they know that who will react to it, and they'll penetrate the point they're utilizing. That's the one kind of fascinating finding that did it. And the other part is, I think this, beyond the CSAM and beyond the industry, this is something that I'm also guilty of, and something that we are all as a platform thinking about is big players. There's a resource out there, engineers and analysts, data analysts, to looking at the rollout of the detection tool, AI detection tools, and then enhance basically. But as a smaller companies, a lot of struggles that we go through is we are quick to roll out, but not so much of the iteration or making it better. And with that, I think I'm 99.9% confident that they know that. So one of the examples that we saw was the penetration testing on their end. What they do is they won't use the CSAM. They will use the adult nudity because the platform tend to react lesser than the minor, and they will either try to burst out with the 5 different accounts to see if the platform will react. what they do is they will change the schema of the photo and try to upload it, see if they can bypass. So they do this penetration testing to see what works and what doesn't work. And what they do is they create this map of, all right, for this platform we see this vulnerability, for this platform we see vulnerability. So what they do is they will go to big marketplace, big player, to identify the users who often shares a similar username in other platform, and they will rule or basically entice the miners. They will move to platform with their vulnerability to do another action. And I talk about those like five different things where sourcing happens somewhere, and content creation, distribution happens somewhere, and money happens another platform. So what they do is like they decentralize the activity, making sure the network is hard to identify. So those are not just the evolution of the criminals, but also the faulty on our end. How do we, as a platform's service provider, do increase it? And then, of course, it's not a part of this topic. And Sean, like for me, working the smaller company, something that we are thrilled to try on. I know there's a lot of problems with it. Is when we don't have when we have limited engineers, when all these resources are really provided us, how do we implement that without the engineering resource? And maybe AI can help us. Maybe people who have no technical background. Of course, our DevOps will hate this, me saying this one. But how do we utilize AI to potentially utilize this tool much easier? Because like it's one thing for us to take a screenshot QR code and understanding this is fascinating. How do we get the resource? I think in that end, I think we as a platform need to also thinking about how do we utilize AI to use as a part of the trust and safety team to implement some of these technical solutions.
It's great, June. We've heard a lot about that a offender may attempt to move a miner to an encrypted platform. Juliet, can you talk about how we can mitigate harms in those contexts?
Yeah. So, as June said, I think a big part is doing that penetration testing of trying to figure out, like where can I send these things and draw the customers or clients to a platform that's less protected. A lot of encrypted platforms also probably have some degree of unencrypted content. Maybe it's a profile photo, maybe it's public servers or channels. And I think that there's been a lot of prior literature and research done in terms of file sharing detection, really looking at the metadata and behavioral signals. I do want to give a shout out to one of my co-founders, Camille Francois. She developed this framework called the ABC framework: actors, behavior, and content. So if you look at each one siloed on its own, you're not going to get the complete picture. And that's especially true in end-to-end encrypted platforms. Just because you don't have the content doesn't mean that you can't try to learn more about what's going on with the actor and then their patterns of behavior as well. So I think those are some really strong signals that we can do. And then going back to smaller platforms as well, I think I'm going to mix a bunch of metaphors and probably confuse myself. But I think if we make technology more accessible, we can both lift the ceiling of kind of like the basic minimum standards of technology that's being used, and also lower the access and barrier to entry so that we get more people in this room, more people sharing resources, adopting, and especially on the open source side, maybe they contribute to the same upstream project so that the iteration takes place, even if you don't have an engineering team that's fully dedicated to improving that technology over time.
Okay, thanks, Juliet. And just a warning, folks, we're going to move to questions from the audience after this last set of questions here, so get ready and get excited, please. Get very excited. Okay, Fran, let's talk about staying ahead and countermeasures. So how are AI systems evolving to stay ahead?
So AI just it supercharges you, doesn't it? It helps you to move a lot faster and operationalize what you know as an intelligence unit. You can sort of build that into tech. So we use it to help with the cross-platform problem. So usually it's a layered approach of looking for, wherever you find a strong signal, and that might be often, like you say, bad actors try and evade detection. They're very ComSec aware. They understand the internet environment and where they can speak freely. And they usually do when they know the platforms have poor trust and safety measures. But that's where they give us a lead, and that's where we can start to detect those people, and then we can use AI to sort of industrialize and scale up the detection of those actors as they move across other platforms. So behavioral detection, whilst I think it is really important, can be noisy. So you need to use that AI to sort of like link the strong signals to your behavioral detection and then run it across, the broader OSINT picture that you're getting from multiple platforms. So I think AI can really help you act more decisively and quickly. And to your point, John, you need to be constantly iterating on that. You're sort of it's like trying to chase smoke. The evasion is consistent. Like your iteration has to be consistent to keep up. Albeit strong identifiers, that they're harder to change. They take more time. So typically, especially in coordinated abuse and the scams, and the high volume ones, those organizations don't change the ones that are hard to do, because that's expensive operationally. They're a business, they don't want to have to do that, so they keep shifting. So we use the AI for that. That's sort of on the detection side. We're also working on the detection of unknown CSAM. That's a real issue. The hash sets are really useful, but they're fragile when the data changes. So that's a big focus for us. We want to be able to use classifiers to find unknown content. It just gives you that reach. You also need to be able to classify and understand the nature of the content. It was really interesting, the mention earlier of using Gemini to understand what you're seeing as well. Is it anime? Maybe it's coming from adult sites that perhaps have got really good age verification on, so you can start to triage and prioritize your signals. So that's on the detection side. We also use AI to help us action better. So let's say you have detected CSAM, or you have a perhaps public reporting of CSAM or other harms. You can use AI to just help you get a bit further ahead in your triage and do that more quickly. So again, like when you maybe have a noisy data set because there's public reporting in there, etc., or even hash sets, we know they have faults and we know there's data in there which is perhaps adjacent to the CSAM, you can use AI to help you filter that out. I think another way, and the sort of final way I'll say, is like with our behavioral detection, we run AI over our processed intelligence. So rather than look at the raw data of signals, which again is very noisy, processed intelligence is extraordinarily high quality. Like it's gone through human review. You've got well-skilled people that have made those assessments. So if you can then use AI to look at that body of information that you have and say, okay, well, there's actually patterns here that you haven't detected, and there's intersections between different risk types. Again, if you're using that common terminology, you can say, well, there's a lot of this financial sextortion happening, or there's a lot of boys being targeted in this sextortion, which we didn't realize about before. So it can just start to lift out and give you a bit more clarity on the patterns in the data that maybe you hadn't seen before. Yeah.
This is awesome. Fran, just as you're talking about it, sounds like you are doing this. You're doing the things you just talked about?
We capture intelligence,
That's
we
fantastic.
label it, and we
let's
run
give her a
that over
hand.
the top. Yeah.
That's great. Now, I mean, because, people have been talking a lot about, I know you're all deploying it in different ways, but people for the last 2 years have been talking a lot about the potential for AI for good, right, on child safety, and we're aware of the harms, but it's really good to see it being deployed and the progress we're making. Tyler, do you want to provide us with an example to close this out before we move to questions?
Yeah, I mean, sure. Fran did sort of blow me away. I'm very impressed. But, where we started with AI a little bit was kind of in the investigative process. So again, you've got so much data and so much signal. It's difficult for agents who are looking at like high volumes of alerts and kind of triaging to like connect the dots. AI has co-pilot capabilities have really, as opposed to sort of 80% of the time processing and 20% of the time like really making sort of critical decisions. I think it's got the potential and is starting to sort of flip that mix for us, which just allows us to be much more efficient, but it's also much more effective. The results are better. So I think that's kind of where we've started. I do think it's amazing, June, like the idea that you could sort of vibe code, something yourself very quickly. We're seeing a lot of folks within our organization. We've developed a model agnostic AI agent called Goose that sits on people's desktop, and they can integrate whatever LLM they want, but they can do, I use it all the time just to say, FinCEN came out with guidance earlier this week. Like, what does that mean? Where should I be looking across our policies and procedures? But I do think that there's a lot more sort of capability that we can now put in the hands of individuals who are working on these issues every day. And they are really the ones that are kind of coming up with some of the different solutions. So I think, one area, that people kind of quickly look at is, where have we seen peer-to-peer platforms used? Where have we seen Bitcoin used? What's the typology there? And then, I think at some point down the road, being able to sort of put that, across our data and sort of looking for, where does that typology emerge that we didn't detect with our normal rules? What does that mean? How do we evolve that typology? So again, I do think we're kind of in some early stages in terms of how we're using AI. I think it has tremendous ability to kind of take, some of the processing out. I think ultimately over the long run, asking sort of AI to kind of look at a large data set and say, where do you see this pattern occurring? I think has a lot of potential. I do think there are issues that are serious ones for us about the sensitivity of that data, exposing it to those models. I think we need, again, these are solvable problems, but I don't know that we know exactly where those lines should be right now. So we're obviously being very sort of respectful of the trust we have with our customers and the sensitivity of that data. But I think over time, I'm very sort of bullish ultimately that this is going to create an environment where it's very difficult for bad actors to evade detection. And I think maybe the last point I'll make, though, is this is, again, not something where you sort of put it on autopilot and sit back. It's going to take sort of constant iteration. I think it will be a game of like cat and mouse a little bit. Bad actors will get, sophisticated, but I think it was also mentioned earlier today, though, that they're sophisticated, but at times unsophisticated. And so those little breadcrumbs with AI can be easier to spot.
Yeah, fantastic. And we'll see the progress next year. I imagine it's going to be exceptional. So this is all great. Now, what we'd like to do is open it up to questions. If you have a question, I see Alicia has her hand up. And someone will bring a mic to you so folks who are joining us online can hear.
That's all I'm supposed to throw.
It is a box.
Okay. I've got this. Looks like a nuclear football here. Thank you so much. Fascinating panel. So much to unpack and kind of continue to work on together here. I wanted to bring in the bias question because obviously we talk a lot about bias and fairness testing, particularly in age assurance. But I think we have kind of less of a mature conversation about how to test in terms of bias for CSAM detection and classification. So I wondered if you guys could say a little bit more about how you are kind of testing for bias. Obviously, one of the things I'm excited about with the universal classification schema is as companies, we often don't want to label content based on presumed ethnicity or gender, but obviously happy to take those labels if others can provide them. So I just wonder if you could say a little bit more about what testing is being done at present, could be done in the future, and how you think we can kind of incorporate some of that emergent understanding of the importance of bias testing.
Who would like to try that?
I don't do any of this testing myself, but I do have a lot of strong opinions about it. I think that one of the things that the Roost team has talked a lot about is kind of acknowledging that there's really no source of truth data sets in terms of bias evaluation or testing. So it's really difficult to get a sense of if any of the frontier models are properly kind of like safeguarded for either like outputting or even potentially being trained on something like this. I think that there are a lot of opportunities. I think like there are probably opportunities in terms of kind of like different types of like guarded but like freely accessible like data sets that can be used by researchers to evaluate these models. I think also like for platforms to evaluate the models because having worked at multiple companies where like the content format or the type of content on our platform is very different from other types of content platforms, trying to figure out the right model, the right kind of technology to use. It was really difficult to evaluate that given so many of the models are closed source and almost resistant to that kind of evaluation. So no answer, Alicia, but I do think that this is actually kind of like we need to collectively ring this alarm bell a little bit and say that there is an immense need for strong data sets, and not just for CSAM, but also other aspects of child safety, like self-harm, emotional dependence on chatbots. A lot of these things, there's very little transparency into where those evaluation data sets are truly coming from.
Yeah, and Alicia, sometimes the question makes a great point. But I think it also reinforces the need that once these tools are deployed, there needs to be continued iteration and evaluation. We can't just push them out and then step back and let them roll. We got to look at the outputs. Did you want to say anything? Or are you good?
I think just to add to it a little bit, with CSAM and other illegal data sets where you can't hold the CSAM to train your model, can you? So that the source of the data set is really important, and it's important that it's representative of online CSAM, for example. So And it's a challenging one. It's not like detecting apples and pears or other objects or even other humans in non-illegal scenarios. So there is a natural bias to that data set anyway, because there's a bias in terms of the offence and the contact offence of children that actually ends up online. And we know that some nations are disproportionately represented or omitted from that. So I would say it's a naturally biased data set, and we should be comfortable with that. You know, and obviously grateful of the ethnicities that aren't represented, but we also don't. There isn't a burden to you. Don't have to human review this content, and obviously that's a traumatic job. But it does need to be done so that you can see where it is getting it wrong, and that there are some touch points, and some organisations who are able to feed that back into the system and say, well, look, these models are not behaving well for this type of scenario, or this type of ethnicity. So I think just having that loop in, and at least having a few points where people are equipped, trained, and supported to do the human review is sort of feeding back to the model development as well.
Great answer.
Sorry, I will do one quick shout out. The only public data set that I do know of is around grooming data. It's about 10 years old now or something, but I believe it's called the perverted justice data set. That is currently being used by a lot of organizations who are trying. But yes, I know. I see Nuria shake your head. I have mixed feelings about this data set. I think it's not necessarily very well representative. It's also English only. Talk to me or Nuria afterward if you've got questions or comments.
Okay. Another question?
Yeah, thank you.
Please.
Maybe I'm the newbie in the room. So
Can you identify yourself?
yeah, I'm David from Mexico on behalf of PAST Foundation, of a hotline or line of report. I'm their benefactor to them. So my question is, can you tell if there is AI running the whole process from the phishing to the money, to getting the money, or to getting the interact with the real person? Are you aware of that? You are not, and if it's possible soon, to have AI running the whole process, not only modifying pictures or voices or things, but running the whole process.
Great question.
I'll chime in, and I guess my response would be, I don't see why not. We certainly see all the different components of that. If you look at the phishing messages that we're all getting in the last 5 years, they're tremendously more effective. I saw the phishing messages that were coming into a global healthcare organization that are extremely well done. They look perfect. They are not the phishing messages of 10, 15 years ago with broken links and poor grammar. They are extremely effective. And so you marry up the effectiveness of phishing campaigns to run automated 24/7. You combine that now with artificially generated content that can be married up to be sent out. So I don't think there's any reason why an automated process could be running from soup to nuts from one end to the other in order to increase the amount of content that's out there, and then tie that in with financial sextortion, with automated scripting. We're painting a pretty ugly picture, but I don't see why that's not happening today.
Thanks, Brian. June?
And really echo to the Brian point, like, why not? And then before that, I think it goes to Tyler, your point is we utilize AI as co-pilot because we yet trust the AI 100%. I think that's what we're seeing is that we may not see fully implemented AI because same as criminal like us, they may not trust AI yet. Doesn't mean it will never come. So I think it's a contradictory, but like what we're going to see is as we start integrating AI more and make it more autonomous, I think that's when we're going to see more autonomous AI penetrating our system as well. So kind of goes to like really Alicia, your point of to your question is like the AI is contradictory, where yes, there's a biased data set in the AI, but on the other hand, because also AI is getting hot in the market, there's more scholars and academics who are interested in the biased AI will surface this issue, right? So it's funny how those like this harms and then also the benefit of fighting the harm almost go together, and this is where the cat and mice kind of games comes in.
Right.
Hi. So we've been talking quite a lot about signals and sharing signals. And I think that's a great initiative, Lantern and others. What I've been thinking about is at which point does a behavior become a signal? When you're sharing amongst yourselves, how do you make sure that you make the most of that sharing and turn emerging behaviors into signals? Do you have like an internal memo that you send to each other and you then therefore say, hi guys, for these particular contexts, these are not just behaviors now, they've become signals. And then if we just really want to close the loop, then at what point do those new signals, as they go from behaviors to signals, then become features of the products that then therefore change then how we protect. So
Change the design.
yeah, a little bit of that cycle would be really enlightening to hear a bit more about.
Anyone want to speak to that?
Since I'm working on it right now, for that, if you look at from a high level, it's much difficult. But like if you kind of segment it out, it may be easier in a way, right? So depending on the behavior types, depending on how user what kind of mess stays then, right? What kind of IP address they're using. There's some of the data attribute that kind of indicate us to saying that this may happen in the future. But this also goes to the latest point of bias, right? So for example, if a video goes live and there's a basically people like pressing a like in within a minute, like 5 million view, 50 chance that the content is amazing viral. 50% the content may be really, really abusive as maybe a CSAM, right? So I think another thing that this is more of a difficulty that we're trying to figure out is like, if we want to prevent something that before it becomes a behavior, then aren't we just applying the labeling theory on that, right? So are we say, okay, because of your X, we're going to think you're criminals, right? Is this the right thing to do? So I think for our platform, we're right now in the process of developing the user risk rating, and that is something that we haven't not yet fully solved yet because of the bias labeling that we don't want to put it in. And we've been kind of leaning towards AI to see if AI can kind of help us do more testing with the more data set and give us more precision scores to understand, all right, so if we have to take a risk-based approach, what's the least risk that we could take it? So I think those are the levers that we're currently utilizing right now.
Tyler, did you want to add something?
Yeah. I mean, I love this question because it is really, I sit down every week with people who are looking at cases. And one of the things we look for is inauthentic sponsors, inauthentic parent, people who are saying they're a parent-child and they're going to sponsor an account, but that's, in fact, turns out not to be the case, or whatever happens. The signals that we're looking at are some of the things, I won't reveal it all, but we're looking for, geolocation that corresponds. We're looking at things like age differential. We're looking at last name. All of those things, though, if you think about it, and I saw one just last week, they can lead us to, think something is inauthentic. And then when we really understand, when we do the deep investigation, it's not. And so I think it's important just to remember that behaviors are, I don't know. I mean, they're always going to be behaviors. I don't know that they always resolve 100% into a sure shot sort of typology where you can say, this is always going to be what it is. And so I do think we all have to approach it with enough humility to realize financial access and behaviors are evolving all the time. And so you need to be looking below the line constantly. I do think, however, though, that memo, as we put that together, pushing it out, this is not, proprietary information from my perspective. This is the kind of stuff, if you look at what has been done in other jurisdictions, like the FinTel Alliance and things like that, making sure that, what we discover or what others discover is sort of put into the mix, and we can all, pressure test it, share it, and do all that. We have used, these typologies and behaviors very much to what I was talking about earlier, push upstream into our KYC controls and our product construct. So our product that we have built for teens on Cash App is very much kind of built around understanding what does authenticity look like, what does legitimate use look like, what type of reporting, what are the default settings, what type of parental controls, what type of education support, all that. And I think it is important, to push all of that out and sort of take an all of the above approach. But I do think a little bit, behaviors are changing. The way people are using tools are changing a little bit. I've seen enough instances myself, not just in child exploitation, but other areas where folks who are using 7 different debit cards because they work as a gig worker, and that's how they get paid. A typology that for AML would have historically been wow, that looks very suspicious is actually not once you understand it. And so I think approaching it with that level of, humility, but then, yeah, absolutely, to your point, build those signals into, sort of high precision models, and then share them out with industry, pressure test them, be ready to evolve them. That's sort of how we've been approaching it. And I actually am fairly optimistic in general about how that's working for us.
Yeah, and how are we for time? Okay, we'll do one more question. But also, Professor, like the circle of evolution that you're looking for. How is that then incorporated into product design? I don't have enough time to give you all the different examples, but that's generally how those new child safety features come about on those products. It's due to that full circle. So it's a continuous process. Please, one more question. We have someone. That's the box. You have the box.
Hi, everyone. Derek from the Internet Watch Foundation. We have one of the world's few facilities where you can come to within our secure environment and train classifiers, et cetera, on illegal imagery. And I know actually a couple of different panelist organizations have benefited from that. So I asked the question in this context. I mean, it seems prima facie obvious that there is a massive Western bias in known CSAM. Our main tool, the hash list, has, if you put all of us together, NetMex, C3P, IWF, everyone in this room, you've got 34, 35 million hashes. You have an estimated 300 million children every year that are exploited using some kind of online element. If 1 in 7 of them are used to create CSAM artifacts, everyone can do the math. And so I worry we have a structural and self-perpetuating bias in the technology we use, at the very point when, as several people have said, artificial intelligence gives us the ability, if deployed correctly, to bridge the gap between known and unknown CSAM and its removal. Quite dauntingly, I am tasked with a project to try to figure this out. So I'm asking the panelists to do my homework for me. Where would you start in correcting that bias? And the footnote I would just add is that every time someone in another culture from another demographic actually deploys something, it brings up huge hits. There was a case in South Korea recently where something like 30 million hits in a couple of days deploying a specialist crawler. So I ask it in that context.
Yeah, that's great. And I just want to point out, we're in Washington, D.C. Someone used the word humility, and then someone just demonstrated humility. So we're off to a good start. So do you have any response to that?
I think that certainly the non-G20 countries would benefit greatly from access to this technology. The question earlier about bias, certainly for those of us who have worked in careers where we've had access to CSAM, we've seen that bias. We've seen what those children look like. But we have to understand that there is child sexual abuse that's happening around the world. And having worked in global law enforcement with partners in non-G20 countries, there is a lack of access to technology and resources. You have police that are on the street that don't have funding to have ammunition in their weapons, and they are tasked with working cases to stop violent crime from happening. So I think making the technology accessible, no matter ability to pay for access to that technology, is a first step.
Okay. Good. Great.
So I think as well, having like that really strong link to law enforcement is critical to not having the gap. So if you are getting a direct feed in of seized media and the content that is actually online, and that's coming into the hash sets as well, it's being effectively triaged and being brought in, rather than relying solely on public reporting, which there's a natural bias there, like some imagery will be reported more because it's seen as more egregious or more offensive, or that particular nationality or culture is more proactive in terms of reporting. Mm-hmm. So you can, like, if you're relying on the public, you're only seeing part of the picture. So I think you have to have the law enforcement angle in there too. And you need, again, that sort of consistency of regulation to keep keep casting the net and bringing it in. So requiring, platforms to report, to submit that imagery so that it then feeds back into these hash sets and feeds back into the data sets, so that even if, there aren't actual children being abused, but there's AI gen like targeting specific nationalities and cultures, that content has to be reported, has to be categorized, and then it has to come back into the system. So I think you sort of need a trifecta of measures to keep feeding the models so that they are representative and catching what's really out there online.
Thank you. Thanks, Fran.
And if I could sneak one
Yeah,
really
please.
quick. I think also like Brian was saying, that providing more access to that technology, but then also something really simple like localizing the language of the documentation for the technology as well. Making sure that if it's a review tool designed to review hashes, like that interface supports more than just English as a review language. The technical engineering documentation for how to implement different types of libraries, or maybe it's a cyber tip documentation, or maybe it's like the hasher matcher actioner. Saying that out loud really fumbles me every time. The HMA documentation from Meta's open source hashing platform, like making sure that's localized into multiple languages too. I think that's how we really get to the more cross-functional aspect of technology access.
And so it's just one quick. Can I add you more headache than the answer? The question that we need, right before when I was working for non-US based company, my question was this: is children in Korea, Japan, or wherever equally protected as a children in the US?
Mm-hmm.
The answer is not, right?
Mm.
And the way you kind of go to the downstream, there's a multiple factor that we could talk about in hours, but I think here the fundamental is that because the service providers are predominantly based in the US and EU, the issue is some of these countries do not have service provider. They have a really, really tight privacy law, but not so much not so much on the regulation around the service provider. So what that does is that it kind of prevents the information or the data that can be used to improve some of the data set is kept within the country, so that it doesn't become a part of the signals, but it's just kept within and in the black box somewhere. So I think that's another issue that we need to talk about when we talk about privacy. Is it's not just about the privacy, but for those countries that does not have a service providers, or does not have a social media company, for example, how do they approach the regulation? How do they approach about the privacy? Also, how do they approach about some of this utilization of the data to making an improved model? I think that is another industry problem that we have not yet solved.
Great point. Okay, well, thanks to our panelists for a great conversation. And back over to you, Samantha.
Thanks.